Tonight, you walk into a New York newsroom in the year 1865, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of anything at all. It's the smell. Ink, yes, but not the clean smell of a modern printer cartridge. This is ink boiled from lamplight and linseed oil, a thick, oily stench that coats the back of your throat like tar. And beneath that, the sharp bite of turpentine used to clean the rollers, the sour sweat of 30 men working through the night, and the unmistakable metallic tang of lead. Molten lead, solid lead, lead dust floating through the gaslight like a slow, poisonous snow. You're standing in the city room of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley's empire, and it is 3 a.m. The presses haven't even started yet. You probably won't survive this shift. Not because of any rival newspaperman waiting in the alley with brass knuckles, though that's not entirely off the table, but because the room itself is trying to kill you, slowly and with great enthusiasm. The lead in the air will get into your bones if you stay long enough. The gas jets hissing overhead could ignite the loose paper at any moment. And the press itself, when it starts, is a roaring iron beast with no safety guards, no emergency shutoffs, and absolutely no concern for where you put your fingers. But you're here because the paper must go out. It goes out every morning, 7 days a week, rain or shine or civil war. And it will go out tonight with or without your fingers attached. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You came in through the side door on Nassau Street, the one propped open with a wedge of folded cardboard because the latch broke 3 years ago and no one's had time to fix it. The hallway is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 men to pass, and the walls are painted a color that might have been green once but has since darkened to something closer to swamp water under decades of coal smoke and gas lamp soot. You follow the noise, not the presses yet, but the voices. The city room is waking up, even at this ungodly hour, because the morning edition is a living thing that demands constant attention. Through the doorway, and the room opens up before you. It's vast, 2 full floors of a converted warehouse with the ceilings cut away to accommodate the height of the presses. Gaslight fixtures hang down on long chains, their flames adjusted low for now but ready to be turned up the moment the real work begins. Desks are scattered everywhere, not in neat rows but in clumps, as if the furniture wandered in on its own and fell asleep wherever it landed. Each desk is a disaster zone. Stacks of newspapers yellowing at the edges, coffee cups with things growing in them, galley proofs covered in red ink corrections, and everywhere, loose paper. Paper drifts across the floor like autumn leaves. Paper spills out of waste bins. Paper is crammed into shelves and piled in corners, and you realize with a creeping dread that this entire building is just one stray spark away becoming a very spectacular bonfire. Men in shirt sleeves move between the desks, most of them wearing green eye shades, that iconic visor that cuts the glare of the gaslight and makes everyone look like a riverboat gambler who's lost one too many hands. Some clutch copy paper, the stories they've been writing and rewriting all night. Others carry long strips of proof, the first printed versions of the day's news, marked up with corrections so dense you can barely see the original type underneath. A boy no older than 12 weaves through their legs with a tray of coffee, the cups rattling dangerously on their saucers, and no one even looks at him. They just reach down, grab a cup, and keep walking. Against the far wall, taking up most of the space, is the reason you're really here. The printing press. It's not running yet. That would be deafening. But it dominates the room like a sleeping dragon. All iron frames and heavy rollers and massive cylinders waiting to spin. Men in aprons move around it with oil cans and rags, checking bearings, tightening bolts, performing the 1,000 small rituals that keep a steam engine from exploding and taking half the block with it. One of them, A man with forearms like smoked hams and a beard that could house small birds catches your eye and jerks his head toward a clipboard hanging on the wall. You're on the schedule. You're expected. You just have to figure out what you're supposed to do. You make your way through the chaos, past a compositor swearing at a stick of type that refuses to justify properly, past an editor arguing with a reporter about whether approximately is a real word or just something made up by lazy writers. It is, in fact, a real word, but the reporter will lose this argument anyway. Past a massive pot-bellied stove glowing orange in the corner where someone's warming his hands despite the fact that it's July and the room is already an oven. The heat is suffocating. The gas lights add their own warmth, and the press, when it starts, will add more. And the windows don't open because they were painted shut during the Fillmore administration and no one's bothered to chip them free. The foreman with the magnificent beard waves you over. His name is Patrick, or maybe it's Michael. Honestly, in this era, every Irish foreman is either Patrick or Michael, and you'll just have to guess. And he's been running this press since before you were born. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't ask if you've done this before. He just points to a pile of paper stacked higher than your head and says, "Feeder." That's your job. You're a feeder. When the press starts, you'll stand at one end and feed single sheets into the grippers, one after another, as fast as you can, for hours, without stopping, without thinking, without letting your attention wander for even a single second, because if you miss a sheet, the whole press jams, and if it jams, Patrick will notice, and if Patrick notices, you will be back on the street before the sun comes up. You nod. Patrick grunts. This is your orientation. The room hums with anticipation now. The last of the type is being locked into place upstairs in the composing room. Massive iron frames called chasers, each one holding the complete set of metal type for a full page. When they're ready, men will carry them down, carefully, so carefully, because one stumble and 8 hours of work scatters across the floor in 1,000 pieces. The stereotype process, if they use it, will create a curved plate that wraps around the press cylinder, but for now, for this press, they are still using flatbeds. The type forms will be locked onto the press bed, rolled with ink, and pressed against the paper by a massive cylinder that rolls over them with enough force to transfer the image cleanly. You watch as the first form arrives, carried by two men who move like pallbearers at a very important funeral. They slide it onto the press bed, and Patrick himself comes over to check the lockup. He runs his fingers over the type, feeling for anything loose, anything that might shift during printing and turn today's headline into an unreadable smear. Satisfied, he nods, and the men begin cranking the bed into position under the cylinder. The gas lights flare brighter as someone turns up the flow. The steam engine in the basement, connected to the press by a massive leather belt running through a slot in the floor, begins to hiss and clank as the fireman stokes the boiler. The whole building vibrates, just slightly, a deep thrumming that you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. Patrick looks at you. He looks at the paper pile. He jerks his head toward your position. It's time. You take your position at the feeder, and immediately realize you have no idea what you're doing. The press looms in front of you like an iron altar, its massive cylinder polished to a dull gleam by thousands of hours of friction. To your right, a continuous belt of leather, wide as your chest, disappears through a slot in the floor, and you can hear it slapping against the wood below with each revolution of the steam engine's flywheel. The whole room seems to pulse with that rhythm, a heartbeat that belongs to the machine and not to any man. Patrick appears at your elbow, and for a moment you think he's going to explain the process, offer some wisdom, give you any hint at all about what you're supposed to do. Instead, he grabs a sheet from your pile, holds it up to the light, and runs his thumb across the surface. He's checking the grain, you realize. Paper has a grain, just like wood. And if you feed it against that grain, it'll curl and jam and ruin everything. Satisfied, he drops the sheet, points at you, points at the press, and walks away. The foreman, you're learning, is not a man of many words. He doesn't need to be. He's been running this press since before the Mexican War, since before the telegraph changed everything, since back when newspapers were printed on hand-cranked wooden screws, and if you wanted 1,000 copies, you worked until your arms fell off. He started as a feeder himself, probably right where you're standing now, and worked his way up by watching, by learning, by surviving long enough to absorb the knowledge that no one ever bothered to write down. That knowledge lives in his hands now, in the way he touches the machinery and listens to its complaints, in the way he can tell by the sound of the cylinder whether the impression is too light or too heavy. He's the high priest of this iron temple, and you're the newest acolyte, expected to learn the mysteries through sheer exposure. Across the room, a man with a greasy cap and arms scarred by old burns is working on the inking system. It's a complex arrangement of rollers, some leather, some composition, some a mysterious gelatinous substance that looks disturbingly organic, all mounted on iron frames with adjusting screws at every joint. The rollers transfer ink from a brass fountain to a distributing table, where it's spread thin and even, then onto the foam rollers that will actually touch the type. Getting the ink right is an art. Too little, and the type prints gray and spotty, unreadable in the morning gaslight. Too much, and the ink squishes out around the letters, filling in the counters and turning headlines into solid black rectangles. The inker runs his hand over the composition rollers, checking for soft spots, for cracks, for anything that might leave a streak on the paper. He finds something, mutters a phrase that would make a longshoreman blush, and begins scraping at the roller with a curved knife. You watch him work, and you notice something strange. The composition rollers aren't metal, and they are not leather. They are made of glue and molasses. Literally, a mixture of hide glue and molasses, cooked together and poured into molds around iron cores, then allowed to cool into a rubbery, tacky cylinder that picks up ink beautifully and transfers it just as well. They are also temperature sensitive, humidity sensitive, and prone to turning into a sticky puddle if the room gets too hot. Which it always does. Which means the inker spends half his night scraping, adjusting, and occasionally crying softly into his rag while the rollers slowly disintegrate around him. Historians still argue whether the invention of composition rollers in the 1820s was a genuine technological breakthrough or just a desperate attempt to make printing slightly less impossible. But either way, they worked well enough to dominate the industry for decades. Until they melted. But the rollers are the least of your concerns right now, because a whistle shrieks somewhere in the depths of the building. A steam whistle, loud enough to rattle your teeth. And Patrick raises one massive hand. The room goes still. Every eye is on that hand. For a single, suspended moment, the only sounds are the hiss of gas and the distant thumping of the steam engine. Then the hand drops, and the world ends. The press engages with a sound like God ripping a very large sheet of canvas. The cylinder begins to spin, faster than you thought possible. Its massive weight somehow achieving full speed in just a few revolutions. The bed starts moving beneath it, sliding back and forth on tracks, carrying the heavy form of type under the rollers, under the cylinder, back again, over and over. The inking rollers drop into place with a pneumatic hiss, spreading a fresh film of ink across the type with each pass. And you realize, with a jolt of pure terror, that you're supposed to feed this thing. Patrick is watching you. Not angrily, not impatiently, just watching, with the calm, detached interest of a naturalist observing a particularly confused species of bird. You grab a sheet, hold it by the leading edge the way you saw him check the grain, and feed it toward the grippers. The grippers are metal fingers attached to the cylinder, and they snap open and close with mechanical precision, grabbing each sheet at exactly the right moment and pulling it around the cylinder to meet the type. Your first sheet goes in crooked. The grippers grab it anyway, because they have no choice, and it wraps around the cylinder at an angle, printing the page lopsided and tearing itself to shreds in the process. Patrick doesn't react. He just watches. You grab another sheet. This time you get it straight, or straight enough. The grippers grab, the cylinder turns, and somewhere in the guts of the machine, paper meets type with a pressure of several tons per square inch. The sheet emerges on the other side, now covered in fresh ink, and is caught by a system of tapes and strings that guide it onto the delivery pile. It's working. You're doing it. You feed another, and another, and another, and soon you're in a rhythm, a hypnotic cycle of grab, feed, release, grab, feed, release, while the press thunders on and the pile of blank paper slowly transfers from your side to the delivery side. The room fills with noise that isn't really noise anymore, but something closer to weather. It presses against you from all sides, vibrating in your bones, until you can't tell where the machine ends and you begin. The gas lights flicker with each revolution, their flames dancing to the rhythm of the press. Ink particles float through the air, settling on your skin, your clothes, in your lungs. You've been feeding for what feels like hours, but a glance at the clock shows it's only been 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The night stretches ahead of you like an ocean. Patrick approaches again, and this time he actually speaks. "You're dropping your left hand," he says, his voice somehow carrying over the roar. "You drop your left hand. You lose the rhythm. Keep both hands moving." Then he's gone again, vanished into the forest of machinery, leaving you to process this information. You adjust your grip, keep both hands in motion, and the rhythm smooths out. You're not just feeding anymore. You're dancing, a two-handed dance with a machine that cares nothing for your exhaustion. The rhythm holds, and somewhere around the 200 sheet, your body finally accepts that this is its life now. Your hands move without conscious thought, left hand lifting a fresh sheet while right hand guides the previous one into the grippers. A continuous loop that bypasses your brain entirely and runs straight through your spine. This is good, because your brain has other things to worry about, like the fact that the type itself is a miracle you still don't quite understand, and you keep catching glimpses of it between sheets. That heavy iron form covered in thousands of individual letters all locked together to tell the story of yesterday's world. When the press finally slows for a moment, Patrick signaled for a stop to check something, and the sudden silence feels like falling. You allow yourself to actually look at the type form. It's beautiful, in its way. A full newspaper page, 8 columns wide, composed of tens of thousands of tiny pieces of metal, each one a single character. The headlines are larger, chunks of wood type painted black with ink, but the body text is all metal, all handset, all placed there by men who spent their nights standing at type cases picking letters one by one. You run your finger gently across the surface, feeling the reverse image of the words, all backward and upside down, and you try to imagine reading it this way. You can't. The human brain isn't built for that kind of mental gymnastics, which is exactly why typesetters spent years learning to think in mirror images. The compositor who set this form, his name is Frank, and you'll meet him later when he comes down to check his work, started learning his trade at 14, back in the 40s, when the only way to get type into a chase was to pick it by hand. He started with a composing stick, that simple L-shaped tool that's been basically unchanged since Gutenberg's time. You hold it in your left hand, adjust the sliding stop to the width of your column, and then your right hand dances across the type case, picking letters from their compartments and dropping them into the stick. But here's the trick. You have to set them upside down and backwards, because when you're done, You'll transfer the line to a galley, and when that galley is locked into the press, it'll print right reading onto the paper. So every letter you pick has to be rotated 180 degrees in your mind before it goes into the stick. An uppercase A looks like a little tent with a serif on top, but in your stick, it looks like a tent standing on its point. A lowercase d, set backwards, looks exactly like a lowercase b, which means if you're not careful, and if you're tired, and it's 3 a.m., and the gaslight is flickering, you'll set an entire line of type that reads perfectly in your stick but prints out as gibberish. Frank learned to avoid this by touch as much as sight. Each letter has a distinctive feel, a nicked edge or a particular weight that tells his fingers what it is before his eyes confirm. He can set type in the dark, and sometimes does, when the gas pressure drops and the flames gutter low. He can set type while carrying on a conversation, while arguing about politics, while half asleep on his feet. His fingers know the type case the way your fingers know the keys of a keyboard. Except there are more than 90 compartments in a standard case, arranged not in alphabetical order but in a layout that's been handed down for centuries. Uppercase letters, that's where the term comes from, by the way, are in the uppercase, the tilted box above the compositor's waist. Lowercase letters are in the lowercase, the flat box within easier reach. Capitals are used less often, so they go farther away, while the letters E, T, A, O, I, N, the most common in English, get the prime real estate right under your fingers. You watch Frank work later, after the press run is done and he's correcting a typo someone found in the first edition. He pulls a bodkin from his apron. That's a thin, pointed tool for picking out individual letters, and carefully digs the offending character from the locked form. The form is under pressure, locked tight with wedges called coins, so removing a single letter without disturbing its neighbors requires the delicate touch of a safecracker. He gets it out, drops it into his palm, and replaces it with the correct letter from a small box he carries. Then he taps it home with the butt of the bodkin, checks it with a magnifying glass, and nods. The fix takes maybe 4 to 5 seconds. He's been doing this for 23 years. But handset type has its limits, and you're about to discover one of them now. The press starts up again, and you resume your feeding rhythm, and everything goes smoothly for maybe another 100 sheets. Then Patrick appears at your elbow again, this time holding a printed sheet that he's pulled from the delivery pile. He doesn't say anything. He just holds it up to the light and points. You lean in, still feeding automatically. Thank God for muscle memory. And look where he's pointing. The type is wearing down. You can see it in the finer details, the serif starting to round off, the counters filling in slightly, the overall impression getting just a little bit muddy. Metal type is soft. It's made of lead, with a little tin and antimony to harden it, but it's still soft enough that the pressure of the press, the repeated impact against the paper, gradually deforms the letters. After a few thousand impressions, a font starts to show its age. After 10,000, it's practically unreadable. After 20,000, it's scrap, melted down and recast into fresh type. This is why newspapers had to have enormous quantities of type on hand, and why they were constantly buying new fonts from the type foundries. It's also why the stereotype process, which you'll encounter later, was such a game changer. But for now, you're watching type die in real time, the letters slowly flattening under the relentless pressure of the cylinder, and you realize that every newspaper you've ever held was printed from type that was, at that moment, in its final hours of existence. By morning, much of this type will be back in the melting pot, waiting to be born again as tomorrow's headlines. You feed another sheet, and another, and you start to notice the variations in the paper itself. Some sheets are smoother than others, some have tiny imperfections, some are slightly off size. The paper comes from a mill upstate, made from rag pulp, cotton and linen scraps, not wood pulp, which won't be common until later in the century. Rag paper is stronger, more durable, but it's also inconsistent. Every batch is slightly different, and the press has to be adjusted for each new shipment. Patrick handles this by feel, by sound, by some sixth sense that tells him when the impression is right. You handle it by feeding a little more carefully, by watching for sheets that feel wrong, by learning to anticipate the paper's quirks before they cause a jam. The gas lights flicker again, and for a moment you're working in near darkness, your hands finding the sheets by touch alone. This is when you understand what Frank meant about setting type in the dark. The body knows. It learns. Your hands have been feeding for hours now, and they've developed their own memory, their own rhythm, their own relationship with the machine. You don't need to see the grippers anymore. You feel them. You feel the exact moment when they're about to open, and your sheet arrives right on time, every time. The machine and you are partners now, dancing together in the flickering gaslight. The partnership with your press is interrupted by a change in the room's atmosphere. Not the temperature, though that's still oppressive, but something in the quality of the light, the angle of the shadows. You glance toward the windows and see the first gray hints of dawn trying to force their way through decades of grime. The night shift is ending, but instead of slowing down, the press room is accelerating into a final frenzy, because the morning edition has to be on the streets before New York wakes up, and there are still thousands of sheets to run. Patrick has vanished into the basement, and when he reappears, he's trailing steam and looking satisfied about something. You learn why a moment later, when the whole building shudders and the press, already running at what you thought was top speed, somehow finds another gear. The steam engine downstairs is getting more pressure now, the fireman feeding it coal like a man possessed, and the leather drive belt is slapping so fast it's almost a blur. The cylinder spins faster, the grippers snap quicker, and suddenly you're feeding at a pace that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. Your hands blur. The sheets fly. The delivery pile grows like something alive, and you realize you're grinning like an idiot, caught up in the pure mechanical ecstasy of it all. This is what progress feels like. This is the future, thundering through a converted warehouse on Nassau Street. The press you're feeding is a Hoe rotary, or at least a close cousin to one, and it represents everything that's changed about printing in the last 20 years. Richard Hoe, whose family had been building presses since 1805, introduced his rotary design in the 1840s, and it absolutely demolished everything that came before. Previous presses had been flatbed affairs. The type sat on a flat surface, a flat cylinder rolled over it, and that was that. They were fast, faster than the old hand screws, but they had limits. The bed had to stop at the end of each stroke, reverse direction, stop again, and the whole start-stop-start rhythm cost time and energy. Hoe's idea was simple but revolutionary. Put the type on a cylinder instead of a flat bed. A big cylinder, with the type forms curved to fit its surface, and let it spin continuously. No stopping, no reversing, just endless rotation and paper feeding through as fast as the grippers could grab it. The problem, of course, was how to get the type onto a curved surface. You can't just bend a flat form of type around a cylinder. It'll fall apart, letters scattering everywhere like metallic confetti. This puzzle kept printers awake at night for years, and the solutions they came up with range from clever to absolutely bonkers. Some tried locking type into curved chases, which worked okay for short runs but required specially cast type that most newspapers couldn't afford. Others experimented with flexible stereotype plates, which we'll get to soon enough. Hoe's early rotaries got around the problem by putting the type on the outside of a huge central cylinder and using smaller impression cylinders around it. That way the type could stay flat on the big cylinder's surface while the paper wrapped around the small ones. It was complicated, expensive, and absolutely brilliant. The press you're feeding now is one of those early designs, a massive central cylinder surrounded by multiple impression cylinders, each one printing a different section of the paper simultaneously. You're only feeding one of them. There are feeders at every station, all working in the same desperate rhythm, and the combined output is staggering. 20,000 papers an hour, when everything's running right. 20,000. That's more than some colonial printers produced in a year. The Tribune alone goes through more paper in a week than Benjamin Franklin printed in his entire career. But speed comes with costs, and you're about to discover one of them now. A sheet jams. Not at your station, someone else's, across the room. But the whole press is connected, and when one feeder misses, everyone pays. The jam propagates through the machine like a disease. Paper crumpling and tearing, grippers grabbing nothing, tapes snapping under the strain. Patrick appears from nowhere, moving with a speed that seems impossible for a man his size, and begins pulling levers, releasing tension, unwinding the disaster before it can damage the type. The press slows, stops, and in the sudden silence you hear the offending feeder being loudly and creatively described in language that would make a stevedore blush. You look at your own pile. It's down to the last few inches. You've run through nearly a full carton of paper in one shift, and your hands are still moving, still reaching for sheets that aren't there anymore. Patrick appears at your station, nods once, the closest thing to approval you're likely to get, and jerks his head toward a stack of wooden pallets in the corner. More paper. You're not done yet. As you drag the next carton into position, you notice something odd about the press itself. Despite its iron bulk and industrial purpose, there's a delicacy to some of its components, a watchmaker's precision hidden inside the beast. The grippers, for instance, are adjusted with tiny screws and springs, each one individually tuned to grab at exactly the right millisecond. The tapes that guide the printed sheets are made of cotton, carefully woven and constantly replaced, because if one breaks, the whole delivery system goes haywire. Even the frame, massive as it is, has been planed and fitted with a cabinet maker's attention to detail, every joint perfect, every bearing aligned. These presses were built by hand, by men who understood that 1/1000th of an inch could mean the difference between a clean print and a ruined edition. You're reaching for another sheet when the gaslights flicker again, and this time they don't fully recover. The pressure is dropping. Happens sometimes, when too many buildings are drawing on the same main, and the flames shrink to blue pinpricks. Patrick curses and disappears toward the gas meter, probably to argue with whatever idiot is stealing his pressure. The press keeps running, because it must, but the glue makes everything harder. You're feeding partly by feel now, partly by the glint of metal where the gaslight still catches the grippers. This is when accidents happen. This is when fingers get lost. The gaslights gutter and hiss. And just when you're certain you'll be working blind until dawn, a boy appears with a lantern on a long pole, moving through the press room like a lamplighter in reverse. He reaches up with his pole and tweaks the valves on each fixture, coaxing more flame from the dying mains, and slowly the room swims back into visibility. The boy is maybe 10 years old, wearing a newsboy's cap and an apron stained with every substance in the building, and he moves with the casual confidence of someone who's been doing this job since he could walk. He catches you watching and gives a little salute, then continues his rounds, adjusting lights, checking gas cocks, making sure no flame touches the loose paper that's everywhere. He's one of the unseen workers, the ones who make everything possible but never appear in the bylines. The press thunders on, and you're back in the rhythm, but your mind keeps wandering to the type itself, specifically, to what happens to it after the run is done. You've noticed that the compositors aren't just setting new type tonight, they are also breaking down old forms, distributing the letters back into the cases for reuse. It's a job that requires as much skill as setting, maybe more. Because if a letter goes into the wrong compartment, some future compositor will spend hours hunting for it. The distribution process is simple in theory. Take a printed form, dampen it with water to loosen the ink, and then pick the type apart, letter by letter, dropping each one into its proper home. In practice, it's tedious, mind-numbing work that tests the patience of saints. Most compositors did it at the end of their shifts, when they were too tired to set new type but still needed to earn their pay. But there's another way, a newer way, and you're about to see it demonstrated. A door bangs open at the far end of the room, and two men struggle through carrying something that looks like an oversized waffle iron. Behind them comes a third man pushing a small furnace on wheels, complete with glowing coals and a bubbling pot of something that can only be molten metal. This is the stereotype equipment, and it's about to change everything you thought you knew about printing. The stereotype process, not to be confused with the modern meaning of the word, was invented in the 1790s but didn't really take off until the 1850s, when newspapers finally got desperate enough to embrace it. The idea is simple. Instead of printing directly from movable type, which wears down and has to be redistributed, you make a mold of the type form and cast a solid plate from that mold. Then you print from the plate. The type itself goes back to the cases immediately, ready to be used again, while the plate can be stored for later printings or discarded when you're done. For a daily newspaper, this was revolutionary. No more tying up thousands of dollars worth of type in a single edition. No more wearing out your fonts in a single press run. Just print, melt, repeat. You watch as the stereotyper, his name is Schmidt, and he's German, because in 19th century New York, all stereotype foundermen are German, prepares his equipment. First, he takes a finished type form, locked and justified and ready for press, and he brushes it carefully with a thin layer of oil. This is so the mold material won't stick. Then he places a heavy iron frame around the form, creating a shallow tray, and begins to pour. But he's not pouring metal. He's pouring papier-mâché. Actually, it's called flong, a special mixture of paper pulp, paste, and clay, beaten into thin sheets and dried until it's flexible but strong. The flong goes over the type, and then Schmidt beats it into the surface with a stiff brush, forcing the wet pulp into every nook and cranny of the type. It's called beating the matrix, and it's exactly as violent as it sounds. Whack, 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 while the flong slowly takes on the shape of the type, becoming a perfect negative impression of every letter. When the beating is done, Schmidt applies heat. Not too much, just enough to dry the flong without scorching it, and then carefully lifts the matrix away from the type. It looks like a thick sheet of cardboard, but on its surface, pressed deep into the pulp, is the entire front page of tomorrow's newspaper, backwards and indented. He carries this matrix to the casting box, that waffle iron you saw earlier, and clamps it into place. Then his assistant brings the furnace, tilting it carefully to pour a stream of molten type metal into the box. The metal fills every depression in the matrix, cools almost instantly, and emerges a few moments later as a solid plate, a perfect replica of the original type form but cast in one piece. Curved, if they need it for the rotary. Flat, if they are still using a flatbed. Either way, it's ready for the press in minutes, and the original type is already being distributed back to the cases. You stare at this plate, this strange metal pancake with its raised letters, and you try to grasp the implications. With stereotyping, a newspaper could print from multiple plates at once, on multiple presses, producing tens of thousands of copies in the time it used to take to print a few hundred. They could send plates to other cities by train, letting distant papers print the same content simultaneously. They could save plates for reference, building libraries of past editions without tying up their entire type inventory. It was, quite literally, A game changer. But Schmidt isn't done. He inspects the plate, running his fingers over the letters, checking for voids or imperfections. Finding none, he passes it to a finisher, who trims the edges with massive shears and drills mounting holes for the press. Then it's off to the press room, where Patrick's crew is waiting to clamp it onto the cylinder. The whole process, from type form to finished plate, has taken maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes to create a printing surface that will outlast the original type by hours or days. You look at the plate, then at the type form being broken down behind you, and you realize you're watching the death of one era and the birth of another. The plate is mounted, the press roars back to life, and you're feeding again. But something has changed in the room's energy. Maybe it's the dawn light finally winning its battle with the gas lamps. Maybe it's the knowledge that the end of your shift is approaching. Or maybe it's the fact that you haven't eaten in 8 hours and your body is starting to remind you, in no uncertain terms, that humans require food. But before you can even think about breakfast, a hand taps your shoulder and a voice tells you to switch places. You're being rotated. New job. New part of the machine. You follow the hand's owner, another worker, older than you, with the hollowed-out look of someone who's been doing this for decades, to the far end of the press, where a narrow staircase leads down into what can only be described as a pit. The stairs are iron, slick with oil, and they descend into a space that seems to have been designed by someone who hated the concept of light. At the bottom, the noise is incredible. You're directly under the press now, or rather, under the floor that the press sits on, and the massive drive shaft is right there, spinning in its bearings, connected by gears and belts to everything above. The air is thick with the smell of hot oil and coal smoke, and the heat is even worse than upstairs, if that's possible. This is the engine room. This is where the power comes from. And this is where they send the new guys when they need to learn respect. Your new job, it turns out, is feeding the press in a different way. Not paper this time. Coal. The boiler sits against the far wall, a massive iron cylinder wrapped in brick and lagging, with a fire door that glows orange every time someone opens it. Your job is to shovel coal from the bin into the fire, maintaining pressure, keeping the engine running, and trying very hard not to die in the process. The man who shows you this, his name is Callahan, and he's been a fireman since before the war, demonstrates the technique with the casual grace of long practice. Open the door, but not too wide. Slide the shovel in, but don't scrape the grate. Spread the coal evenly, but not too thick. Close the door. Check the pressure gauge. Repeat. Simple. Until you try it. Your first shovelful goes in wrong, dumping a pile of coal in one spot and starving the rest of the fire. Callahan sighs, a sound you'll come to know well, and shows you again, slower this time. You try again. Better. Again. Better still. Soon you're in a rhythm. Coal rattling into the firebox, pressure holding steady, the engine humming its satisfaction. Callahan nods and retreats to a stool in the corner, where he proceeds to do absolutely nothing except watch you work. This, you realize, is his version of a break. He's been doing this for so long that supervising a new guy counts as rest. Between shovels, you have time to look around this underworld. It's not just the boiler down here. There are gears everywhere, massive iron wheels with teeth the size of your fingers, meshing together and transferring power to every part of the building. Leather belts run up through slots in the ceiling, slapping against the wood as they turn. Shafts spin in their bearings, each one greased by a system of drip oilers that look like tiny brass faucets. The whole place is a monument to mechanical complexity, a reminder that behind every simple act of printing lies an invisible world of spinning metal and burning fuel. And it's dangerous. So dangerous. The belts can grab loose clothing and pull you into the machinery before you can blink. The gears have no guards. Guards are for people who can afford to be cautious, and newspapers cannot. And they'll take off a finger just as casually as they'll take off an arm. The boiler itself is a bomb waiting to happen. A vessel of superheated steam under pressures that would have horrified a locomotive engineer. If the pressure gets too high and the safety valve sticks, the whole thing will explode, taking half the building and everyone in it with it. It happened to newspapers. It happened more often than anyone liked to admit. But the paper must go out. You're thinking about this, about the fragility of human flesh against iron and steam, when the whistle blows upstairs. Not the steam whistle, a different sound, a hand-crank siren that means something has gone wrong. Callahan is off his stool and up the stairs before you can react. And you follow because following seems like the only option. Upstairs, the press has stopped, which is never a good sign, and a crowd has gathered around one of the feeder stations. You push through, expecting the worst, and find a gem. Just a gem. But also a boy. One of the roller boys, maybe 12 years old, his arm trapped between two rollers where he reached in to clear a paper wrinkle without stopping the press. He's not screaming, which is somehow worse. He's just staring at his arm, at the rollers that hold it, with an expression of pure disbelief. Patrick is there, working carefully with a crowbar, trying to spread the rollers enough to free the boy without crushing him further. The crowd is silent, every eye on that crowbar. Every breath held. The rollers spread. The boy pulls his arm free. It's bruised, probably sprained, but still attached, still moving. Patrick wraps it in a rag torn from his own shirt and sends the boy to find a doctor. Then he turns to the crowd and says, in a voice that carries, "Back to work. Paper's late." And everyone goes. Because the paper must go out. The boy's injury will be noted, maybe, in some ledger somewhere, and his pay will be adjusted for the time he missed. And tomorrow he'll be back at his post, reaching into moving machinery because that's what the job requires. You stand there for a moment, shovel still in your hand, and try to process what you've just seen. Then Callahan taps your shoulder and points downstairs. The boiler needs more coal. You descend back into the pit. And for the next hour you lose yourself in the rhythm of the shovel, the heat, the constant watchfulness of the pressure gauge. The boy's face lingers in your memory, that expression of disbelief, but the work demands your attention and you give it. Coal goes in. Steam pressure holds. The engine spins. Upstairs, you can feel the press running through the floor, a vibration that's become as natural as your own heartbeat. This is your world now, this underground cathedral of iron and fire. And you're starting to understand why men like Callahan stay in it for decades. There's a purity to the work, a direct cause and effect that's missing from the complicated dance of type and paper above. Shovel coal, get steam, turn shaft, run press. Simple, honest, deadly, but all rhythms end, and this one ends with a long whistle from upstairs, 3 blasts, the signal that the press run is complete. The engine slows, the belts slacken, and suddenly the basement is quiet except for the hiss of dying steam and the crackle of the fire settling in its grate. Callahan stretches, nods at you, and gestures toward the stairs. You're done. Your shift is over. You climb up into a press room that looks like a battlefield after the fighting's done. Paper everywhere, some stacked in neat piles, some scattered across the floor in crumpled sheets. Ink on every surface, including most of the workers. The smell of hot metal and exhausted men. And in the middle of it all, the press sits silent, its cylinders still, its rollers cooling, waiting for tonight's battle to begin. You should go home. You should find your bed and collapse into it and not move until sunset. But something keeps you there. Some curiosity about what happens next, about where all these papers go now that they are printed. You follow a stack as it's wheeled toward the back door, and you find yourself in a narrow alley where a small army is assembling. The newsboys. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, ranging in age from 7 to 17, all wearing some version of the uniform. Cap, oversized coat, shoes that may or may not have soles. They are clustered around a wooden platform where bundles of papers are being dropped, still damp from the press, the ink wet enough to smear if you're not careful. And they are watching you. Or rather, they are watching the papers. The papers are money, and money is survival. And survival is the only game that matters on these streets. You watch as the distribution begins. It's organized chaos, but there's a system underneath. The oldest boys, the ones who've been doing this for years, get first pick of the bundles. They know the best corners, the richest neighborhoods, the streets where gentlemen are most likely to spare a penny for the news. They grab their stacks and disappear into the dawn, moving with the practiced speed of urban predators. Then the next tier goes, and the next, until finally the youngest boys are left with whatever remains, usually the thinnest bundles, the least desirable corners, the neighborhoods where a newsboy might stand all day and sell nothing. But they take what they can get, because a few pennies is better than no pennies. And no pennies means no food, and no food means... You don't finish that thought. One of the boys, maybe 9 years old, with a face so smudged with ink and dirt that his features are barely visible, catches your eye and holds up a paper. You reach for your pocket automatically. Then remember you don't have money. You're a worker, not a buyer. And your pay won't come until the end of the week. The boy shrugs and tucks the paper under his arm. Already moving toward the street. Already shouting his first cry of the morning. Extra. Read all about it. Union victories. Extra. The cry is picked up by others, spreading through the alley like a chant, and soon the whole ragged army is streaming onto the streets of New York, their voices rising above the clatter of early morning wagons and the distant whistle of ferries. You follow one of them, just to see, just to understand. He's small, this boy. Small enough that the stack of papers under his arm seems to tilt him slightly to one side. But he moves with purpose, heading for the intersection of Broadway and Chambers, where the morning traffic is heaviest. He stakes out his spot, a patch of sidewalk near the curb, not too close to the other boys, not too far from the flow of pedestrians, and begins his work. Paper, mister? Only a penny. Latest from the front. Paper. Most people ignore him. Some brush past without a glance. But every few minutes, someone stops, fumbles in their pocket, and hands over a coin. The boy takes it, hands over a paper, and pockets the penny with a speed that suggests long practice. He doesn't smile. He doesn't thank them. He just moves on to the next potential customer, the next chance, the next penny. This is business, pure and simple, and sentiment has no place in it. You watch him for an hour, standing in a doorway across the street, and you start to notice things. How he watches the crowd, identifying likely customers by their clothing, their pace, the direction of their gaze. How he modulates his voice, sometimes loud and aggressive, sometimes soft and almost pleading, depending on who he's addressing. How he keeps one eye on the other newsboys, watching for territory disputes, for the older boys who might try to take his corner or his customers. How he counts his remaining papers constantly, calculating how many he needs to sell before he can quit, before he can eat, before he can go home to wherever home is. Home, for many of these boys, is nowhere, or everywhere. The streets, mostly. Some have families, crowded into tenement rooms where a dozen people share a single space. Others are orphans, runaways, throwaways, surviving on their wits and the thin charity of the city. The newsboy trade was one of the few that would take them. No questions asked, no papers required. Buy your papers wholesale for 6 cents a dozen. Sell them retail for a penny each. Keep the difference. A good day might mean 30 cents. A bad day might mean nothing. A very bad day might mean getting beaten up by older boys who want your corner, or getting arrested by cops who want you off the streets, or getting sick with no one to care for you and nowhere to recover. And yet, you watch this boy, this small, dirty, exhausted boy, and you see something in his posture that isn't despair. It's something harder, something sharper. Determination, maybe, or just the simple refusal to give up. He's still calling out, still watching, still working his patch of sidewalk, and every penny he earns is a small victory against a world that would prefer he didn't exist. The paper in his hands is yesterday's news, literally. But for him it's today's bread, today's chance, today's reason to keep going. The newsboy vanishes into the crowd, and you're left standing on Broadway with the morning fully arrived now. Wagons clattering past, shopkeepers opening their doors, the whole machinery of the city grinding into motion. You should sleep. You will sleep. Eventually. But first, you turn back toward the newspaper building, drawn by something you can't quite name. Maybe it's the unfinished business of understanding this place, this world that exists in the hours when respectable people are in bed. Maybe it's just the knowledge that your shift may be over, but the building's day is just beginning. Back inside, the press room has transformed. The thunder is gone, replaced by the clatter of cleanup and the murmur of voices. Men with rags and buckets are wiping ink from every surface, scrubbing rollers, polishing cylinders, performing the endless maintenance that keeps the machinery alive. The smell is different now. Less ink, more soap and turpentine, with an undertone of the coal smoke that still drifts up from the basement. And there's a new sound, too, coming from somewhere above. The rhythmic thump of something heavy, repeated over and over, like a giant with a very regular heartbeat. You follow the sound upstairs, past the composing room where Frank is already setting type for tomorrow's edition, past the editorial offices where night writers are handing off their stories to the day's shift, past a door marked folding room. No admittance that someone has left slightly ajar. Through that gap, you see them. The women. The folding room is a separate world, physically connected to the press room but socially miles apart. Here, in a long, narrow space lit by the same inadequate gaslights, perhaps 30 women sit at long tables, their hands moving in constant, synchronized motion. Before each woman is a stack of printed sheets, fresh from the press, still smelling of wet ink. And each woman is folding. Not casually, not occasionally, but continuously, at a pace that seems impossible until you watch for a few minutes and realize they've been doing this for hours. The sheets come in stacks, get folded once, twice, 3 times, however many folds the paper requires, and then get stacked again, ready for the newsboys. And then the next stack, and the next, and the next. You watch one woman, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of face that suggests she's seen things and survived them. Her hands move without her looking at them, her eyes fixed on some middle distance while her fingers perform their intricate dance. Fold, crease, stack, fold, crease, stack. She does it 30 times a minute, maybe more, which means she's folded nearly 2,000 papers in the time you've been watching. 2,000. By hand. And she'll do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until her hands give out or the paper folds her. These women are almost entirely invisible in the history of newspapers. Their names appear nowhere. Their wages, less than the men's, always less, are recorded in ledgers that no one reads. Their contribution to the daily miracle of the morning paper is absolutely essential and completely unacknowledged. Without them, the papers would leave the press as flat sheets, impossible to carry, impossible to sell, impossible to read on a crowded streetcar or a bumpy omnibus. The folding makes the paper portable, makes it a product, makes it something a newsboy can tuck under his arm and hawk to passing commuters. And the folding is done by women, always women, because folding is considered women's work and women's work is paid less and valued less and forgotten faster. But watch them closely, and you'll see the skill. It's not just folding. It's speed, precision, consistency. Every fold has to be exactly aligned, exactly creased, or the paper won't stack properly, won't sell properly, won't read properly. A crooked fold can make the difference between a customer who buys and a customer who walks past. So these women fold with the accuracy of machines, but with a flexibility that no machine of this era can match. When the paper changes format, and it does, frequently, as editors experiment with page sizes and column counts, the women adjust instantly, their hands finding the new folds without missing a beat. When a rush order comes in, requiring twice the output in half the time, the women speed up, their hands blurring, their faces showing no emotion at all. You notice one woman, younger than the others, maybe 20, who seems to be teaching a new girl the trade. The new girl is perhaps 14, nervous, her first attempts at folding coming out crooked and slow. The older woman doesn't speak. There's too much noise, too much concentration required, but she demonstrates, slowly, showing how to align the edges, how to apply pressure for a clean crease, how to pass the folded sheet to the stack without looking. The new girl tries again. Better. Again. Better still. In an hour, she'll be almost as fast as the others. In a week, she'll be indistinguishable. In a year, she'll be teaching someone else. These women are almost all Irish immigrants, or the daughters of Irish immigrants, because in 1860s New York, the Irish do the work that no one else will do. They are Catholics in a Protestant city, outsiders in a nation that doesn't quite want them, but they have something that the newspapers need. Hands that can fold. Nimble hands, quick hands, hands that learned their speed in the sweatshop and the tenements and the endless struggle to survive. The folding room pays poorly, but it pays regularly, and regular pay means rent, means food, means life. So they come, day after day, night after night, and they fold. Historians still argue whether the working conditions in these folding rooms were genuinely oppressive or merely typical for the era. The women sat on hard benches, sometimes for 12 hours at a stretch, with few breaks and no conversation allowed. The ink fumes probably didn't help their lungs. The repetitive motion destroyed their hands over time, leaving them with arthritis and carpal tunnel and the thousand small agonies of overused joints. But they also had each other. They shared stories, shared food, shared the burden of survival. They formed communities within the factory, networks of support that no ledger could capture. And when they went home at night, to their tenement rooms, their children, their husbands if they had them, they carried with them the knowledge that they had done something essential. They had made the paper readable. They had made the news possible. The young girl finishes her first full stack and looks up, catching your eye through the gap in the door. For a moment, you're both frozen. You, the intruder. She, the worker caught in the act of being watched. Then she smiles, just slightly, and returns to her folding. You close the door gently and walk away, carrying that smile with you into the noisy chaos of the composing room. The composing room is a different kind of chaos from the press room. Quieter, but somehow more intense. Here, in the long hours before the press run, the actual words of tomorrow's paper are being assembled, letter by agonizing letter. You wander through the aisles of typecases, past compositors bent over their sticks, past boys running proofs to the editor's desk, past the constant background noise of metal clicking against metal as type is set and corrected and set again. And at the center of it all, in a small glassed-in office that looks out over the whole floor, sits the night editor. His name is Mr. Stone, or maybe it's Mr. Greeley himself. No, Greeley would be in his own office, probably sleeping on a cot in the corner because the man never seems to go home. This editor is younger, maybe 35, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who's been awake for days and expects to be awake for days more. He's reading proofs, marking corrections, glancing at the clock, reading more proofs, all while a steady stream of reporters and compositors and errand boys flows through his door with questions, problems, emergencies. He handles them all with the same weary calm, the same quiet authority, the same unspoken understanding that everything depends on him and he must not fail. You're watching him through the glass when something happens. A boy bursts into the room. Not the composing room, but the editor's office specifically, skidding to a halt in front of the desk and waving a slip of paper. The editor reads it, and you see something shift in his face. He reads it again. Then he's on his feet, out of the office, striding toward the composing room floor with a purpose that makes compositors step hastily out of his way. "Stop the press," he says. Not loudly, but clearly. And the words ripple through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Someone repeats them, and someone else. And soon the message is on its way downstairs to where Patrick is probably already cursing the day he was born. The editor, meanwhile, is heading for the stone, that massive flat table where the completed type forms are locked up, ready to be moved to the press. He's holding the slip of paper, and you realize what it must be. A late story. Something that happened after the edition closed. Something important enough to justify stopping the press, pulling the form, resetting the page. The compositors gather around the stone as the editor explains. A ship has sunk in the harbor. Not just any ship. A passenger steamer, crowded with immigrants, gone down in minutes with terrible loss of life. The first reports are confused, contradictory, but one thing is clear. This is the story of the day, maybe the story of the year, and the paper cannot go to press without it. The front page must be remade. What follows is controlled pandemonium. The form for page 1 is still on the stone, locked and ready, but now it has to come apart. The compositors work quickly, loosening coins, lifting out columns of type, carrying them to the side while new type is set for the sinking story. The editor dictates from the slip, and a compositor sets the headline in big, bold letters. Terrible disaster, steamer sunk in harbor, hundreds lost. Another compositor sets the body text, working from the reporter's notes, setting type as fast as his fingers can move. The room hums with urgency, with the knowledge that every minute the press is stopped costs money, costs time, costs readers who might buy a competing paper instead. And here's where it gets tricky. The front page isn't just one column of type. It's 8 columns, carefully arranged, with headlines and subheadlines and advertisements and all the visual language that tells readers what matters most. Pulling one story means adjusting everything else, finding space, making the new story fit without destroying the page's balance. The editor makes these decisions on the fly, pointing, gesturing, sometimes physically moving columns of type with his own hands. He's not just an editor now. He's a designer, a layout artist, a master of the strange visual grammar that makes newspapers readable. You watch him work, and you notice something. He's not just fitting the new story into the available space. He's also thinking about tomorrow, about the competition, about what the other papers will do with this news. The Herald will have it, probably. The Times will have it. The Sun will have it. And the Sun is fast, always fast. And if the Tribune doesn't get this right, if they don't get it out first, they'll lose readers, lose advertising, lose the fragile edge that keeps a newspaper alive in this cutthroat city. So the editor pushes harder, faster, demanding more from his compositors, checking every line of type as it's set, making sure the story is accurate, is compelling, is everything it needs to be. Historians still argue whether the pressure of nightly deadlines made editors better or worse at their jobs. Some say it forced them to focus, to prioritize, to make the quick decisions that great journalism requires. Others argue that it led to sloppy work, to errors, to stories that were rushed into print without proper verification. Both sides have evidence. Both sides have examples. What's certain is that the deadline was real, and it was unforgiving, and every night someone had to make choices that would be judged by thousands of readers in the morning. The new type is set, finally, and the compositors begin reassembling the page. They work in a kind of dance, lifting columns into place, checking alignments, tapping coins tight. The editor watches, proof in hand, ready to catch any mistake. He catches one, a transposed letter in a headline, and points. The compositor fixes it without comment. Another check, another fix. Then the form is locked, the coins tightened, and the page is ready. A boy grabs the edge of the stone and begins rolling it toward the elevator that will take it down to the press room. The editor follows, still reading, still checking, still unwilling to trust anyone else with this final verification. Downstairs, Patrick is waiting, his expression suggesting that stopping the press has ruined his entire month. But he takes the form, inspects it, nods once. The press starts up again, slower this time, building speed as the new plates are mounted. You watch the first copies emerge, still wet, still smelling of ink, and the editor grabs one before it even hits the delivery pile. He reads the story, his own story now, checking every word. Satisfied, he hands the paper to a waiting boy, who runs with it toward the newsboy's alley. The first edition of the new, improved, absolutely essential front page is on its way to the streets. The editor disappears back to his office, probably to start the whole process over for tomorrow's edition, and you're left standing in the press room with the thunder of the newly restarted machine vibrating through your bones. You should go home. You've been awake for what feels like days, and your body is sending increasingly urgent signals that it would like to lie down now, preferably in a dark room, for approximately 12 hours. But something keeps you rooted here. Some fascination with the details you've been too busy to notice during the chaos of the press run. The small things. The dangerous things. The ways this place is slowly killing everyone in it. Look up, for instance. Above the press, running along the ceiling, are the gas lines. Hundreds of feet of iron pipe, joined at intervals by fittings that have been there since the building was converted. And at every joint, every fitting, every place where pipe meets pipe, there's a tiny wisp of gas escaping. You can smell it now that you're paying attention. That distinctive odor of illuminating gas, the same stuff that lights the city's streets and poisons its sleepers. It's leaking. Constantly. A little bit here, a little bit there, building up in the corners where the ventilation doesn't reach. And every gaslight in the room is an open flame, burning steadily, waiting for just the right concentration of gas to turn the whole building into a very spectacular fireball. This happened. It happened more often than anyone liked to talk about. Newspapers burned. Printing plants burned. Entire blocks of the city burned. Sometimes, when a gas leak found a flame and the fire spread faster than the hand pumps could handle. The Great Fire of 1835 had already demonstrated what New York looked like when it burned. 13 acres of the city destroyed, hundreds of buildings lost. And that had started in a warehouse, not even a printing plant. Here, with all this paper, all this gas, all this flammable everything, the miracle isn't that fires happened. The miracle is that they didn't happen every single night. But gas is just the beginning. Breathe in, deeply if you dare, and taste the air. That metallic tang is lead. Lead dust, lead fumes, lead particles floating free from the type cases, from the melting pots, from the thousands of pounds of type metal that are constantly being handled, cleaned, recast. The compositors breathe it every night. The pressmen breathe it. The roller boys breathe it. You've been breathing it for hours now, and you'll breathe it for hours more before this night is done. Lead is a cumulative poison. It builds up in the body over time, slowly damaging nerves, destroying organs, stealing minds. The symptoms are unmistakable. The wrist drop, the confusion, the abdominal pain, the gradual descent into madness or death. Printers called it printer's colic or lead palsy, and they accepted it as the cost of doing business. The rollers themselves contribute their own unique hazards. Those composition rollers, the ones made of glue and molasses, they are not just temperamental, they are also a breeding ground. In the warm, damp environment of the press room, the organic material in the rollers can start to decompose, growing mold, attracting insects, slowly turning into something that belongs in a science experiment rather than a newspaper plant. The pressmen scrape them constantly, trying to keep the surface smooth, but they are fighting a losing battle against biology. By the end of a long run, the rollers might be shedding bits of themselves onto the paper, leaving strange spots and smears that readers interpret as ink defects but are actually something much more organic. And then there's the noise. You've stopped noticing it, because the human brain is remarkably good at filtering out constant stimuli, but it's still there, still damaging. The press at full speed produces something like 100 decibels, enough to cause permanent hearing loss after prolonged exposure. The men who work here for years end up shouting at each other even when the press is off, because they can no longer hear normal conversation. They develop that peculiar deafness of the printer, the inability to distinguish certain frequencies, the constant asking of what, even when you've spoken clearly. It's another tax on their bodies, another price extracted by the machine. But the most immediate danger, the one that kills fastest, is the machinery itself. You saw the roller boy with his trapped arm. You've heard stories of fingers lost, hands crushed, whole men pulled into the gears when a loose shirt sleeve caught at exactly the wrong moment. There are no safety guards because safety guards would slow down the work. And slowing down the work means losing money. And losing money means the paper dies. So the machinery sits there, exposed and hungry, waiting for someone to make a mistake. The pressmen learn to move carefully, to keep their hands where they belong, to respect the machine's appetite. The ones who don't learn don't last. And yet, despite all this, despite the lead and the gas and the noise and the crushing machinery, the men keep coming back. The women in the folding room keep folding. The newsboys keep selling. Because this is the work, and the work is all there is. For many of them, the newspaper plant is the best option available. Better than the sweatshop, better than the docks, better than the streets. It pays, however poorly. It provides a kind of community, a shared purpose, a place in the world. And when a printer dies of lead poisoning after 40 years at the case, his funeral is attended by every compositor in the city, because they know that could have been them. Will be them? Probably, if they live long enough. You're thinking about this, about mortality and meaning and the strange calculus that leads a man to trade his health for a paycheck, when a hand lands on your shoulder. It's Patrick. And for once he's not scowling. He's holding 2 tin cups, and in each cup is something dark and steaming. Coffee. Real coffee, not the dishwater they serve in the basement. He hands you one, raises his own in a kind of toast, and says the most words you've ever heard him speak at once. You made it through your first night. Most don't. Drink up. You'll need it for the walk home. The coffee is terrible. It's also the best thing you've ever tasted. You stand there with Patrick, 2 men in a sea of noise and ink, drinking burned coffee from tin cups, and for a moment you feel something you hadn't expected. Belonging. You're part of this now. You've survived the night, survived the press, survived the endless feed and the basement coal and the 1,000 small ways this place tries to kill you. You're a printer. Or at least, you're a printer's assistant, which is close enough for government work, as they say. Patrick finishes his coffee, crushes the cup with one massive hand, and tosses it into a bin that's already overflowing with similar casualties. Then he jerks his head toward the far end of the press room, where a group of boys is gathered around the roller washing station. Go watch, he says. You'll learn something. And because you've learned that Patrick's commands are not really suggestions, you go. The roller boys, that's what they're called, regardless of their actual ages, are responsible for one of the most miserable jobs in the entire plant. After every press run, the ink rollers have to be cleaned. Not just wiped down, but thoroughly, completely cleaned, because dried ink will ruin a roller's surface and make the next day's printing spotty and uneven. The cleaning process involves copious amounts of turpentine, which smells terrible and burns the skin, and a lot of scraping, and a lot of patience, and a lot of very unhappy boys. You watch as they work. The rollers are heavy, maybe 50 pounds each, mounted on iron cores that have to be handled carefully to avoid bending. The boys lift them off the press, with difficulty, because they are boys, not men, and 50 pounds is a lot when you're 12, and carry them to the washing trough. There, they apply turpentine with rags, scrubbing at the tacky surface until the ink dissolves. Then they scrape, using curved knives that look exactly like they could also be used for murder, removing the last traces of ink and restoring the roller's smooth, even surface. Then they rinse, wipe, and repeat. For every roller. Every day. The boy you're watching, the same one who got his arm caught earlier, you realize, his limb now wrapped in a fresh bandage, works with a concentration that seems almost comical given the simplicity of the task. But you understand, watching him, that concentration is survival. The knife is sharp. The roller is slippery with turpentine. One slip, and he's got a cut that won't stop bleeding, or worse. So he focuses, his tongue sticking out slightly at the corner of his mouth, and he scrapes, and he wipes, and he survives. These roller boys are the lowest rank in the newspaper hierarchy, below the feeders, below the fly boys who catch the printed sheets, below practically everyone except maybe the rats in the basement. They are paid almost nothing, worked as hard as anyone, and fired at the slightest excuse. They are also essential. Without them, the rollers wouldn't get cleaned. Without clean rollers, the ink wouldn't transfer properly. Without proper ink transfer, the paper would be unreadable. So the entire operation depends on these boys, these children, these smallest and most vulnerable members of the workforce. And they know it. There's a pride in the way they work, a knowledge that they are doing something real, something necessary. They may be at the bottom, but they are still in the building, still part of the machine, still contributing to the daily miracle of the newspaper. When the paper hits the streets in the morning, when thousands of New Yorkers read the news over their breakfast tables, Those readers will never think about the boys who cleaned the rollers. But the boys think about them. They imagine their work invisibly present on every page, in every perfectly transferred letter, in every clean, sharp impression. It's a small satisfaction, but in a life with few satisfactions, it's enough. The boy finishes his roller and reaches for another. His bandaged hand moves carefully, protecting the injury, but he doesn't slow down. He can't slow down. There are dozens of rollers to clean, and the press will need them again tonight. And if they are not ready, Patrick will notice. And if Patrick notices, someone will be looking for a new job. So the boy works, and you watch. And the morning light grows stronger through the grimy windows. You notice something else about the roller boys, something you hadn't seen before. They are not all boys. A few of them are girls, dressed in the same shapeless clothing, their hair tucked under caps, their faces smudged with ink and turpentine. In the dim light of the press room, with everyone moving fast and no one looking too closely, they pass as boys well enough to keep their jobs. The newspaper doesn't hire girls for this work, officially, doesn't hire them at all except in the folding room. But the city is full of girls who need to eat, and the roller washing station doesn't check too carefully as long as the work gets done. So they work, these invisible girls, hidden in plain sight, earning their pennies alongside the boys. One of them catches you watching and gives you a look that says, clear as words, say nothing. You nod, barely a movement, and she returns to her scraping. You've just become complicit in something, though you're not sure what. The secret of the roller girls will stay with you. Another small piece of the hidden history that makes up the real story of the newspaper business. Historians still argue about the true extent of child labor in 19th century printing. The official records show one thing: numbers of boys employed, wages paid, hours worked. But the unofficial reality was always messier, always more complicated. Children worked everywhere, in every capacity, often in jobs that were officially reserved for adults. They worked because their families needed the money, because the alternative was starvation, because the city had no room for sentiment when survival was on the line. The roller boys and girls were just one small part of a vast, hidden economy of child labor that kept the wheels of industry turning. The roller boys finish their work, and the press room settles into its daytime quiet. You should leave. You know you should leave. But your feet carry you instead toward the composing room, drawn by some magnetic attraction you can't quite name. Maybe it's the type itself, those thousands of little metal letters, each one a tiny piece of history waiting to be arranged. Maybe it's the compositors, with their quiet concentration and their mysterious backwards reading. Or maybe it's just that you're too tired to make good decisions, and wandering around a newspaper plant seems as good a way to spend the morning as any. In the composing room, something has changed. There's a new machine in the corner, half hidden under a canvas tarpaulin, and a small crowd has gathered around it. Frank the compositor is there, looking skeptical. The night editor is there, looking hopeful. And a man you don't recognize, well-dressed, with the confident air of someone who's about to change the world, is pulling the tarpaulin aside with a showman's flourish. The machine underneath is unlike anything you've seen in this room of handset type and wooden cases. It's made of iron and brass, with keyboards and magazines and levers and wheels, and it looks like something between a piano and a small factory. This, the well-dressed man announces, is the Mergenthaler linotype. And it's going to revolutionize printing. You've heard rumors about this machine. For years, inventors have been trying to mechanize typesetting, to replace the slow, skilled work of hand compositors with something faster, something cheaper, something that doesn't require years of training to master. Most of their attempts have been failures. Complicated contraptions that scattered type across the floor or produced unusable results or simply didn't work at all. But Ottmar Mergenthaler, a German immigrant with a background in clockmaking, has apparently solved the puzzle. His machine, first demonstrated a few years ago, actually works. And now it's here, in your composing room, about to be demonstrated for the skeptical eyes of Frank and his colleagues. The demonstrator, his from the Mergenthaler Company, here to sell the machine, sits down at the keyboard and begins to explain. The linotype, he says, casts type as it sets. Instead of picking individual letters from a case and assembling them by hand, the operator types on a keyboard, and the machine assembles matrices, brass molds for each character, into a line. Then it casts that line as a single solid slug of type metal. Hence the name, line O type. The slug comes out hot, ready to be locked into a form, and the matrices are automatically distributed back to their magazines for reuse. One machine, one operator, can do the work of several hand compositors. Faster, cheaper, better. Frank's face is a study in controlled emotion. He's been setting type by hand for 23 years. His fingers know the type case the way his tongue knows his own mouth. He can set a column faster than most men can read it. And now this machine, this clanking monster of gears and levers, is supposed to replace him? He crosses his arms and watches as the demonstrator begins to type. The machine whirs to life. Matrices drop from their magazines, sliding down little channels to assemble in the stick. The operator types faster. He's good, clearly practiced. And the matrices keep coming, forming words, forming lines. When a line is complete, the machine does something magical. It justifies it, spacing the words evenly, just as a hand compositor would do with tiny pieces of blank type. Then the molten metal flows, and a slug emerges, a solid line of type, ready to print. The whole process takes seconds. The demonstrator pulls the slug from the machine and hands it to Frank. Frank turns it over in his hands, runs his fingers across the letters, holds it up to the light. Then he passes it to the next compositor, and the next, and the next. No one says anything. The slug is perfect. Clean, sharp, every letter aligned, every space even. It's as good as handset type. Better, maybe, because it's all one piece and won't shift during printing. The night editor is smiling. He's already calculating the savings, the speed, the possibilities. With linotypes, the paper could set more type in less time, could handle late-breaking stories with ease, could expand and grow and dominate the competition. The machine represents progress, and progress is always good, isn't it? But Frank isn't smiling. He's looking at the machine, then at his own hands, then back at the machine. He's thinking about what this means. If the linotype catches on, and it will, it clearly will, then hand compositors become obsolete. Their skill, their years of practice, their hard-won ability to read backwards and set type in the dark, all of it becomes worthless. They'll be replaced by machine operators, younger workers who can learn the keyboard in weeks instead of years. They'll be out of work, out of a trade, out of the only life they've known. Historians still argue about whether the linotype was a blessing or a curse for the printing trade. It certainly made newspapers cheaper and faster, which meant more newspapers, more reading, more literacy. It probably saved the daily paper as a viable business, allowing it to compete with the new mass media that were emerging toward the end of the century. But it also destroyed a craft, turning skilled artisans into machine tenders, replacing human judgment with mechanical repetition. The compositors who fought the linotype, and some did, bitterly, weren't Luddites afraid of change. They were workers defending their livelihoods, their identities, their place in the world. You watch Frank as he hands the slug back to the demonstrator. His face gives nothing away, but you see something in his eyes. A calculation, a decision. He's too old to learn a new trade, too proud to become a machine operator. But maybe there's a place for him still. Maybe the machine needs someone who understands type, who can spot errors, who can maintain the quality that handset work represents. Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe the future has no place for Frank at all. The linotype demonstration ends, and the crowd disperses slowly, each compositor carrying away his own private calculation of what this machine means for his future. Frank lingers longest, running his fingers over the machine's surface, feeling the warmth of its freshly cast slugs, perhaps saying goodbye to something he hasn't quite lost yet. You leave him there and wander back toward the press room. But the building has other plans for you. A hand grabs your arm. A different hand, younger, more urgent, and a voice says, "You, come on, special edition." You're pulled through a door you hadn't noticed, down a staircase you didn't know existed, and into a part of the building that seems to have been constructed specifically for moments like this. It's a small press room, separate from the main one, with its own press, smaller, older, but still formidable, and its own crew of pressmen, already scrambling to prepare for a run. In the corner, a compositor is setting type at a speed you wouldn't have believed possible, his hands blurring as letters fly from case to stick. And at the center of it all, barking orders and checking proofs, is a man you recognize from his portrait, Horace Greeley himself. The New York Sun is about to print an extra, not the Tribune. You've somehow crossed over, physically or metaphysically, into the offices of its great rival. Or maybe you haven't. Maybe in the world of 19th century newspapers, all buildings are connected, all presses are the same, and a special edition is a special edition regardless of which paper's name appears at the top. Either way, you're here. And you're about to witness something that happens only a few times in a newspaper's life. The creation of news so urgent, so important, that the regular schedule must be abandoned and a special edition rushed to press. The story, you gather from the shouted fragments around you, is huge. A major battle has been fought. Gettysburg, maybe, or Antietam, or some other name that will echo through history. The first reports are just coming in over the telegraph wire, fragmentary and confused. But one thing is clear, this is the biggest story of the war so far. Thousands dead, generals fallen, the fate of the nation hanging in the balance. And the Sun is going to have it on the streets within the hour. The energy in the room is unlike anything you've felt before. It's not the steady, grinding rhythm of the regular press run, but something sharper, faster, almost frantic. Reporters run in with scribbled notes, hand them to compositors who set them instantly, then run out for more. Editors huddle over the telegraph receiver, parsing the Morse code as it comes in, shouting the words to waiting scribes. Greeley himself writes the headline, his pencil moving across a scrap of paper in big, bold letters. Glorious victory. Great battle in Pennsylvania. The enemy routed. The type is set almost before the ink is dry on his pencil. The form is locked, carried to the press, mounted. The press starts, not the thunder of the big rotary, but a faster, higher-pitched clatter that somehow matches the urgency of the moment. You're pressed into service as a flyboy, catching the printed sheets as they emerge and stacking them for the newsboys. The paper is smaller than the regular edition, just a single sheet printed on both sides, but it contains the most important news many of these readers will ever see. The first copies come off the press, still wet, and Greeley grabs one. He reads it quickly, nods, and hands it to a waiting boy. "Get this to the bulletin board," he says. then start selling. The boy is gone before the words are fully out of Greeley's mouth, racing through the building toward the street, where a crowd is already gathering around the newspaper's bulletin board. A large board outside the office where the latest news is posted for passers-by to read. You catch another sheet, and another, and soon you're in the rhythm. The same rhythm you learned at the Tribune, but faster now, more intense. The press can't run fast enough. The newsboys can't sell fast enough. The whole city, you realize, is hungry for this news, desperate for any word from the front, any hint of how the war is going. And you're part of delivering it. You're part of history. The run finishes. 5,000 copies, 10,000, you lose count, and you step back, exhausted but exhilarated. The press room is quieting now, the special edition done, the regular work of the day waiting to resume. Greeley is still there, reading through the final copies, checking for errors, already thinking about tomorrow's paper and the next day's and the next. He catches your eye and nods once, a small acknowledgement, but from Horace Greeley, it might as well be a medal. You wander outside, into the street, and find yourself in the middle of something extraordinary. The newsboys are everywhere, shouting the headlines, waving the special edition. People crowd around them, pennies held high, desperate for any scrap of information. Strangers read over each other's shoulders. Men argue about the meaning of the battle, the chances of victory, the cost in lives. Women cry, openly, right there on the sidewalk. The city has stopped, just for a moment, to absorb this news, to feel this collective emotion, to share in this history that's being made even as they read about it. And at the center of it all, still damp from the press, is the paper. Your paper. The one you helped create. The one that will be read and debated and saved and maybe, someday, studied by historians trying to understand what this moment meant. You've been part of something tonight, something bigger than a single shift or a single press run. You've been part of the news itself. The crowd around the newsboys slowly disperses, each person carrying away their own copy of history, their own piece of this moment. You stand on the sidewalk, paper in hand, watching as the city absorbs the news and begins to move again. Wagons clatter past. Shopkeepers open their doors. The ordinary business of life resumes, now colored by the knowledge of what's happened somewhere else, to someone else, to everyone else. And you realize, with a small shock, that you've been awake for nearly 24 hours. Your body feels it. Every muscle aches, every joint complains, every nerve ending seems to be firing at once. But you're not ready to sleep. Not yet. Instead, you follow the newsboys. Not the ones who've already sold out and disappeared into the side streets, but the ones who are still working, still calling out, still chasing the last few pennies from a crowd that's already bought the news. These are the youngest boys, the smallest, the ones who started with the thinnest bundles and are now down to their last few papers, desperate to sell before the news goes stale. You watch one of them, a boy so small he can barely see over the adult's elbows, as he works his corner with a determination that's almost painful to witness. Paper. Extra. Victory. Read all about it. His voice is hoarse, barely a whisper, but he keeps calling. He keeps holding up his remaining papers, keeps scanning the crowd for anyone who hasn't already bought, keeps hoping for that final sale that will let him quit for the day. And eventually, someone stops, a well-dressed man who's probably already read the news but wants another copy for his office, his club, his collection. He hands over a penny, takes a paper, and walks away without a word. The boy pockets the coin and looks at his remaining stack. 2 papers left. 2 pennies. Then he can eat. You watch him sell those last 2. One to a woman who can't read but wants something to wrap her purchases in. Another to a man who's been watching from across the street and finally decides to buy. Then the boy is done. He counts his money carefully, tucks it into a pocket that's already bulging with coins, and heads off down a side street. You follow, because you're curious, because you're tired, because following seems easier than deciding what to do next. The side street leads to another, and soon you're in a part of the city you don't recognize. Narrower streets, taller buildings, more people crammed into less space. The tenements loom on either side, their fire escapes cluttered with bedding and boxes and the other detritus of crowded living. The smells are different here. Cooking grease and unwashed bodies and the ever-present stench of the outhouses that serve too many people with too little maintenance. This is where the newsboys live. This is where they go when the selling is done. The boy you're following disappears into a doorway, and you stop outside, suddenly aware that you're a stranger here, that you don't belong. But before you can turn away, the door opens again and the boy reappears, this time holding a smaller child by the hand. His sister, maybe, or just another kid from the building. They are heading somewhere together, and you follow at a distance, curious now about what comes next. They lead you to a basement door, propped open with a brick, from which warm light and the smell of food emerge. A soup kitchen, or something like it, run by a church, maybe, or just a group of women who've decided that no child in their neighborhood should go hungry. The boy and his sister go inside, and you peer through the doorway to see a room full of children, all eating, all talking, all somehow alive despite everything the city has thrown at them. The boy from the corner is at the center of a group, holding court, telling stories of his day's adventures. He's a hero here, a provider, someone who brought home money and now brings home food. His sister sits beside him, eating slowly, listening to his stories with an expression of pure adoration. You step back from the door, suddenly aware that you're intruding on something private, something sacred. These children have created their own world within the city's indifference, their own community within the chaos. They take care of each other, share what they have, protect the smaller ones from the dangers that lurk on every corner. They are not just survivors, they are a society, a tribe, a family bound not by blood but by necessity. But the city isn't neutral ground. The streets these children work are controlled by forces more powerful than any individual newsboy. Tammany Hall, the great democratic political machine, has its fingers in every part of New York life, including the newspaper trade. The newsboys pay tribute, officially or unofficially, to the ward bosses who control their corners. They buy their papers from distributors who answer to Tammany politicians. They vote, when they are old enough, for the candidates that Tammany supports, because Tammany remembers who its friends are and punishes those who aren't. Historians still argue about whether Tammany's relationship with the newsboys was exploitation or simply the way things worked in 19th-century cities. The machine provided services, jobs, protection, a kind of order, that the official city government couldn't or wouldn't provide. In return, it demanded loyalty, votes, a cut of the proceeds. For the newsboys, this was simply reality. You paid the ward boss or you didn't work the good corners. You supported Tammany candidates or you found yourself arrested for vagrancy. You played the game or you didn't play at all. The boy from the corner will grow up in this system, learn its rules, maybe even rise within it. Some newsboys became ward bosses themselves, using their street smarts and their connections to build political careers. Others died young, victims of disease or violence or simple bad luck. Most just kept selling papers, year after year, until they were too old to be newsboys anymore and had to find something else to do. The system consumed them, used them, and discarded them. But while they were in it, They were part of something, connected to something larger than themselves. You leave the children to their soup and their stories, and you walk back through the city streets as the afternoon light begins to soften toward evening. The paper is still in your hand, crumpled now, the ink smudged from hours of handling. You look at it, really look at it, and you see it differently than you did this morning. It's not just news anymore. It's the product of everything you've witnessed. The typesetters and their backwards letters, the pressmen and their dangerous dance, the women folding in their separate room, the boys selling on the corners, the editor ripping up the front page for a late story. It's all of them, all of that work, compressed into these few sheets of rag paper and lamplight ink. You find your way back to the newspaper building. Which building? You're no longer sure, but it doesn't seem to matter. And you climb the stairs to the composing room. The day shift is well into its work now, setting type for tomorrow's edition, and the room hums with the familiar clatter of metal on metal. Frank is there, at his case, his fingers moving with the automatic precision of long practice. He's setting tomorrow's headlines, tomorrow's stories, tomorrow's version of the same news you've been chasing all night. The linotype stands in the corner, silent for now, but you know it won't stay silent forever. Change is coming. Frank knows it too. Downstairs, in the press room, the night shift is beginning to assemble. Patrick is there, of course, checking his machinery, oiling bearings, running his hands over the rollers that the boys cleaned this morning. He nods as you pass, a small acknowledgement that you've made it through, that you're part of this now. The roller boys are arriving too, slipping in through the side door, taking their places at the washing station even though the press hasn't run yet. They'll clean the rollers again, just to be sure, just to be ready. The press must go out. You find a corner, out of the way, and you watch as the room fills with the night's workers. The feeders arrive, taking their positions. The fly boys drift in, yawning, rubbing sleep from their eyes. The compositors from upstairs send down the first forms, and Patrick checks them, nods, signals that all is ready. The gas lights flare brighter as someone turns up the flow. The steam engine in the basement begins to hiss and clank as the fireman stokes the boiler. The whole building vibrates, just slightly, that familiar thrumming that you've come to know in your bones. And then the press starts. It's the same sound you heard last night, the same thunder, the same rhythm, but now you hear it differently. You hear the typesetters in it, and the roller boys, and the women folding, and the newsboys shouting, and the editor making his desperate last-minute changes. You hear all of them, all of that work, all of that life, compressed into the roar of the machine. The press isn't just printing paper. It's printing dreams, hopes, fears, the whole chaotic story of a city and a nation and a world. It's printing history, one sheet at a time. You watch the first copies emerge, still wet, still smelling of ink, and you think about where they'll go. Some will be read in mansions on Fifth Avenue, some in tenements on the Lower East Side. Some will be folded into newsboys' bags and sold on street corners. Some will be delivered to subscribers by boys on bicycles. Some will be used to wrap fish, to line drawers, to start fires. And some will be saved, tucked into scrapbooks, passed down through generations, until they end up in archives where future historians will study them, trying to understand what this moment meant. The press runs on, and you let yourself drift with its rhythm, your eyes half closed, your body finally surrendering to the exhaustion you've been holding at bay. The noise fades into a kind of music, the heat becomes a kind of comfort, the smell of ink becomes the smell of home. You've been here before. You'll be here again. This is your life now. This rhythm of press and paper, this dance with the machine. And as the night deepens and the press thunders on, You feel something you hadn't expected. Peace. Not the peace of silence, not the peace of rest, but the peace of purpose. You're part of something here, something that matters, something that will outlast you. The paper will go out tomorrow morning, and the next day, and the next, long after you're gone. The press will keep running. The news will keep coming. And somewhere, in the small hours of the night, a new shift of workers will gather to make it all happen again. The gas lights flicker. The press roars. The ink flows. And you, for this moment, are exactly where you belong. As the press room fades around you, the thunder softening to a distant murmur, you let yourself drift on the rhythm of the machine. The ink-smeared faces blur. The clatter becomes a lullaby, and the long night finally releases its hold. You've walked through the foundry of history, felt its heat, breathed its dust, and emerged on the other side with nothing but the memory of work done and stories told. The newsboys will sell tomorrow's headlines, the compositors will set tomorrow's type, and somewhere, in a city that never sleeps, another press will start its run. But for now, for you, there is only the quiet satisfaction of having been part of something real, something true, something that will outlast the night. Sleep well, traveler of the small hours. The paper will be there when you wake.